Chapter 471 Immediate Troubles of the New Post. Silence? That's enough, Tristan shouted. Both Jin and Cory immediately fell silent. Jin, what Cory said was right. Morrison Group doesn't belong to you alone. It belongs to the entire family. I won't let Morrison Group fall into such a crisis. You'll stay at home from now on, and Cory will handle the company's affairs. Jin became agitated. You can't do this, Dad. She never expected that her dad would actually remove her as the CEO. She was the only reason Morrison Group had become what it was today. It might have remained as a small company if not for her efforts. Tristan waved his hands. All right, that's enough. I've already made my decision. You're not making sense. Dad, I can't accept this, Jin shouted as she turned to leave. Tristan shook his head at Jin's grumpy attitude. He wouldn't have done something like this if not for the sake of the family. He had always favored his daughter the most. He understood how much of a whiplash it was for Jin to suddenly lose all of her authority. But as the head of the Morrison family, he had no other choice. Morrison Group wasn't completely up to Jin's or his decisions alone. It also consisted of many shareholders. Tristan had to take into account the opinions of these shareholders. Cory was elated. Thanks, Dad. Tristan replied, It's still too early to thank me. You won't be the next CEO if you can't drive Southlake Corporation out of Dord City. Relax, Dad. I won't fail Morrison Group like Jin did just for a man. I'll definitely drive Southlake Corporation away, Cory declared with confidence. Tristan waved his hand. I hope you're right. Anyway, let me be alone for a while. Sure, Cory answered and hurriedly left. He walked out to find Jin squatting on the ground and crying. He deliberately walked over and smiled at her. Why so sad, Jin? Dad just wanted you to stay at home for a few days. Fuck off. I don't want to see your face, Jin replied as she wiped her tears. Cory wasn't angry at all, even after Jin had just shouted at him. He had finally achieved his goal after all. You should just give up already, Jin. You're just tiring yourself out even if you continue to try. Morrison Group is mine now. And I'll eventually become the head of the entire Morrison family, Cory snorted at her before leaving with a smug face. Jin stared angrily at Cory's back. Don't get cocky just yet, Cory. Dealing with Southlake Corporation isn't as easy as you may think. Meanwhile, in the CEO's office of Morrison Group, Cory sat on the boss's chair with an expression of complacency. He finally claimed the position he had been thinking about for years. He couldn't hide his excitement over becoming the CEO of Morrison Group. Mr. Morrison, I've always known you would be the head of the Morrison family. Someone like Jin couldn't even compare to you, Ginger said attentively as she stood by his side. She immediately defected her loyalty to Cory the moment she learned that Jin had lost her position as the CEO. Jin's era was over, and Cory would become the head of the Morrisons. Cory glanced at Ginger and was disgusted by the scars on her face. He waved his hand and said, That's enough. Alert everyone for a meeting immediately. Ginger became slightly sad. Yes, sir. She didn't dare to say anything else and left the room. 10 minutes later, in Morrison Group's meeting room, both majority and minority shareholders, along with some executives, were called in for the meeting. Everyone attending the meeting was the backbone of Morrison Group. Cory sat on the CEO's seat with a serious face. I'm sure everyone knows about the current situation of Morrison Group. We're currently facing a crisis. It was the first time that Morrison Group had run into trouble ever since they became the largest conglomerate within the city. Southlake Corporation was invading their territory in full swing, and Morrison Group's presence in the market might disappear if they didn't retaliate. It would have been disastrous for the company. Mr. Morrison, this is all Jin's fault. That's right. Jin caused us to lose so much money. How are you going to resolve this? We demand suitable compensation, or we'll have to consider electing an actually capable CEO. The shareholders present began to express their dissatisfaction after Cory finished his words. Morrison Group never took its shareholders seriously throughout its rapid growth over the years. The shareholders were now trying to use this opportunity to get the company to hand over more shares. Cory frowned as he realized the shareholders were targeting him to look for trouble right after he became the CEO. He was furious as he declared, Who do you think you are? When did you think you could tell me what to do? Cory took a closer look at the shareholders. He realized that the ones making the most noise were the minority shareholders. The Morrison family never cared about their opinions as the shares they held didn't pose any threat to Morrison Group. What did you just say, Mr. Morrison? We're also shareholders of Morrison Group. What do you mean? That we don't have a say? We may be minority shareholders, but we still have the right to voice our opinions. What's this? The Morrison family thinks they can do whatever they want because they have the majority of the shares? Cory's reply had angered them. If the Morrison family tried to call the shots all by themselves, the minority shareholders would surely band together to deal with them. Other shareholders looked at Cory and awaited his answer. They were very interested in seeing how he would resolve the issue. These minority shareholders wouldn't have been so arrogant if the CEO was still Jin herself. But Cory was just some nobody who became the CEO through family ties. The atmosphere inside the meeting room was getting more and more tense by the minute. The Morrison family might very well lose its control over the company if Cory couldn't solve the current issue. Cory suddenly smiled. He had to make a move, or everyone might think he was an easy target after assuming the CEO's position. You over there! Who the hell are you? Cory bellowed as he pointed at one of the men who shouted the loudest earlier. I'm from the Blairs. We're the third largest shareholder of Morrison Group, the man declared with a smug expression. Oh? Cory stood up and walked toward the man. Cory then grabbed the man by his collar, startling the latter. What do you think you're doing, Cory? Let go of your hand, the man shouted. He was shocked that Cory would approach him like this. Chapter 472, Inhumane. Cory grabbed the Blair family's representative by his neck. The man's face turned red as he tried to struggle and break free. Who do you think you are to tell me what to do in my meeting? A clean and crisp sound rang out across the room as Cory snapped the man's neck. The Blair family's representative couldn't have ever imagined that Cory would kill him at a place like this. The crowd looked up at Cory in shock, wondering if he had gone insane to be killing someone in public. There were dozens of witnesses sitting inside the meeting room. One of the men slapped the table and shouted, "You're full of yourself, Cory. Do you really think you can solve everything by killing others? It seems that we need to weaken the Morrison family's authority." Cory threw the body onto the floor and stared at the man who just shouted at him. And who are you? I'm from the Moore family. We're the second largest majority shareholder. The Moore family's representative continued, Don't get cocky, Cory. Soon, we'll unite together and kick you out. Morrison Group belongs to the shareholders. We can't have the Morrison family controlling it all by themselves. Hab! Kick me out, you say? A loud thud rang out as Cory punched the Moore family's representative in the head. The man's head was smashed into mush, and blood splattered everywhere. Cory took out a piece of tissue from his chest pocket to clean up his hand. He sneered at the body. Who do you think you are? Everyone present was left dumbfounded. The two corpses lying on the floor were proof that Cory had gone insane. The smell of blood soon enveloped the entire meeting room. Everyone frowned, but none dared to speak up about it. Cory had just turned into a murderous demon. He never considered the shareholders as anything more than mere ants for him to stomp. Cory sat back down on his chair and declared, Please step forward if you still have anything to say. The crowd sheepishly looked at each other. Cory then clapped his hands. Seems like we're all finally on the same page. I hope the rest of you will be careful down the line, or you'll be joining those two on the floor. Cory's ruthless tactics had scared everyone in the meeting room. No one had ever taken him seriously because they thought he was just a playboy. They were all shocked when he revealed his ruthlessness the moment he stepped up as CEO. Cory continued, Everyone here is a part of Morrison Group, and I can't deny that the company's growth was the result of everyone's combined efforts. But his short pause made everyone shudder, as they wondered what crazy shenanigan he would be doing next. Morrison Group still solely belongs to the Morrison family. Anyone that tries to challenge my authority will be dealt with accordingly. Everyone took a deep breath upon hearing his declaration. They realized that Cory had truly gone off the edge. This was never a meeting to begin with. It was held simply to announce his decree. Cory never even cared about how the shareholders would react. The Morrison family was powerful enough to deal with any of its competitors, even if they came from within. The meeting was truly just for a display of power. Cory spoke up once more. Alright, now let's finally get back into topic. The reason I called for this meeting is to talk about dealing with Southlake Corporation. I would like to announce that we will directly compete with Southlake Corporation from today onward. We'll buy up all of its businesses and even its shares. We'll do anything we can to take over Southlake Corporation. That's stupid, Cory. Southlake Corporation is worth billions right now. Dealing with them is not as simple as you think. Besides, your decision will put all of us shareholders at great risk. We don't agree with your method, Cory. Cory's announcement was immediately met with disagreement. It came from the shareholders with acute business acumen who wouldn't allow such a stupid move to be taken. Acquiring Southlake Corporation would require too much funds, and doing so would place Morrison Group in immense danger. The shareholders couldn't possibly agree to such a risky decision. Cory remained silent as he listened to their disagreement. He quietly scanned through the meeting room, and everyone started shutting their mouths the moment they met his gaze. I'm not here to discuss my decision. I'm just telling you about it, Cory declared. The meeting had no other purpose other than for Cory to flaunt his newfound power and authority. And none had dared to step up and oppose his rule. On the floor were two corpses that had tried. Cory smiled and said, "Very well. I wish for nothing but cooperation between all of us to take down Southlake Corporation and secure a bright future for Morrison Group." He immediately left the meeting room. This is insane. He's completely insane. He doesn't even treat us as human beings. It's not so easy to take over Southlake Corporation like he thinks. Everyone started talking again after Cory had left. Jin was similarly domineering as the CEO, but she still made correct decisions that benefited everyone. But Cory was a complete lunatic who paid no regard to his fellow shareholders. Morrison Group is trying to rule the world. I understand now. Morrison Group wants all of us gone. You're right. We're all going to lose our shares at this pace. They didn't dare to voice their opinions while Cory was still in the meeting room. Everyone began to throw insults against Morrison Group the moment he left. The shareholders were supposed to be part of Morrison Group. They wouldn't just tolerate Cory trying to be the sole decision maker. They wouldn't just sit around and wait for their eventual doom. The shareholders soon left the meeting room with gloomy expressions. From his office, Cory calmly watched them leave. They're nothing but a bunch of trash. I would have kicked all of them out right away if they weren't still useful for the Morrison family. Cory had truly never viewed them as fellow humans. He decided that he would show them who was the boss. Soon, none should voice their dissatisfaction at whatever Cory had to say. "Ginger," Cory shouted. "Yes, Mr. Morrison?" Ginger greeted him. "Here's your first task from me. You may start acquiring the businesses or shares belonging to Southlake Corporation as much as you can. I don't care how you do it. I just want it done," Cory declared. "Yes, sir?" Ginger nodded her head and left the room. Morrison Group finally launched a counterattack against Southlake Corporation by buying out their shares. Such a move had also caused Southlake Corporation's value to skyrocket. And with it was a number of repercussions. Meanwhile, at a branch office of Southlake Corporation, "Miss Stewart, bad news." Landon ran into the room and reported, "Miss Stewart, Morrison Group started buying out Southlake Corporation's shares in huge amounts. They might acquire us at this pace. At the current pace, Morrison Group would soon become the majority shareholder of the Southlake Corporation, and they would soon become the main decision maker for Southlake Corporation." Willow was shocked.
How did this happen?
Chapter 473, The Allure of Money. Willow was confused. Why would Jin make such a decision? This doesn't seem like something she would do. It's way too risky. A misstep and the entire Morrison Group could be done for. It was normal for a larger company to acquire a smaller one. But now, both corporations were of equal scale. Morrison Group's actions were too risky. Caspian shook his head and said, Jin wouldn't do such a thing. Perhaps something had happened to Morrison Group. He knew Jin well enough to know that she wouldn't do something like this. Although Jin had always done her job with excellent execution and efficiency, she wouldn't make such an impulsive and thoughtless blunder. Landon nodded his head and continued, "I agree with Mr. Lynch. I've also just received news that Jin is no longer the CEO of Morrison Group. It's now her brother, Cory, at the helm instead. Ms. Morrison was removed from her position by Tristan himself for her recent performance. I've also heard that Cory had just killed a few of his own shareholders in a meeting." Landon began to wonder if Cory was insane as he realized how absurd his words sounded. Cory seemed more like a murderous demon than a CEO. Both Caspian and Willow were shocked by the news. They were shocked by how utterly stupid Cory was. His actions had truly sent Morrison Group to certain death. Willow turned to Caspian with a worried expression. "What should we do, hubby? I didn't expect this Cory guy to do this. What if he's willing to do anything to achieve his goal? What should we do then?" Cory's actions were frightening because no one could have guessed he would do something like this. Caspian stroked his chin and laughed. "I thought Morrison Group would have been a troublesome opponent. But now, it seems that the idiot Cory had already helped us out. He's going to burn himself for playing with fire." He had been holding himself back when Morrison Group deliberately targeted Willow's company several times. He held back simply because Jin was a friend of his. But now that Cory had become the CEO, he no longer had to restrict himself further. "Hubby, do you have a plan?" Willow asked. From her perspective, defeating Morrison Group was a highly impossible task. Morrison Group had long established its presence within Dord City's every corner. Willow believed that defeating them was simply an unattainable reality. However, she still chose to believe in Caspian as he had never gone back on his word, and everything he said had always come true. Willow couldn't help but wonder if Caspian was really just a general officer as he claimed to be. She wondered if a general officer could have been so powerful. She decided not to pursue him for answers and simply wait for the day when Caspian would tell her the truth. She also knew that it was standard procedure for military details to be kept a secret. Caspian smiled and replied, "Relax, Willow. Just let Cory do as he likes. So long as we hold on to 51% of the shares, he will never be able to overtake us. Besides, I don't believe he could actually obtain half of our shares to begin with." "Are you sure?" Willow asked with a concerned expression. "Don't worry, I know Cory is trying to acquire us. But to be honest, we might be able to do the same and acquire them instead." Willow was shocked. "Huh? Acquiring them? Hubby, you have quite the bold idea, but we don't even have the funds to begin with." Willow liked Caspian's idea, but it was unrealistic for Southlake Corporation to acquire Morrison Group. "Don't worry about it, Willow. There will be a way," Caspian reassured her. Landon stepped up as well. "Mr. Lynch, I agree with MS. Stewart that your idea is way too bold. Besides, unlike us, Morrison Group's shares are spread out sporadically in the hands of many shareholders. And any remaining shares available in the market are few and far between." Caspian laughed. "Of course. Landon, this is an opportunity for you. I need you to contact every shareholder of Morrison Group in private and purchase their shares from them." Landon's face lit up with joy as he realized how smart Caspian's idea was. Considering that Cory had just killed 2 of his shareholders, the rest of them would surely be on high alert and even harbor a grudge against Cory. Southlake Corporation stepping forward and offering a high price to buy their shares was a chance to relieve them of potentially facing Cory again. It was no wonder that Caspian said that Cory was playing with fire. "What a great idea! It's wonderful!" Landon praised Caspian. Caspian smiled and replied, "All right, that's enough. You may get on with it now." Landon left the room and immediately went to work on contacting the shareholders of Morrison Group. Caspian soon left the room as well to call Sylvia. He asked Sylvia to utilize his own funds and invest $200 billion into the stock market and purchase Morrison Group's shares. The stock market soon became extremely turbulent. An anonymous investor had just shown up with immense funds and went on a buying spree for Morrison Group's shares. It had made Morrison Group's stocks go all the way up, and many folks wanted to take the opportunity to make a huge profit. However, they quickly realized they'd just missed the window of opportunity by the time they had invested their money. The remaining loose shares were then bought in one go. Meanwhile, Landon was busy meeting up with various shareholders of Morrison Group. So long as they were willing to sell their shares, he would offer a huge sum to purchase it. $100 million was the starting offer. If that wasn't enough, he would raise it to $500 million. Another raise would bring it to $1.5 billion. None could resist the allure of money, and soon, all the shareholders of Morrison Group agreed to sell their shares to Landon. In less than a week's time, Morrison Group shares were held by only 2 entities. One was the Morrison family themselves, with Southlake Corporation as the other. Meanwhile, at Morrison Tower, Cory was losing his mind as he had never expected that his plan would go wrong. He had wanted to acquire Southlake Corporation, and yet, his opponent had just struck back at him with full force, intending to do the same but with the roles reversed. The shares were all locked in place, and there was nothing left to buy. At this rate, Morrison Group would be in grave danger. "Mr. Morrison, bad news!" Ginger shouted as she ran into the CEO's office. "What is it? Why are you panicking?" Cory asked in an unfriendly manner. "Mr. Morrison, our funds have run dry. We're going to be facing a crisis soon," Ginger explained. Cory froze for a moment before asking, "How is this possible? Aren't we supposed to have $30 billion in funds still? Where did it go?" "Mr. Morrison, we've used it all to buy Southlake Corporation's shares. Morrison Group currently has no funds left," Ginger explained with a sad expression. "How many shares of Southlake Corporation do we currently have?" 45% of their total shares," Ginger answered sheepishly. "That should make us the majority shareholder, no? How much does Willow have?" Cory asked. Chapter 474 Turnaround. Morrison Group still had a chance to acquire Southlake Corporation, so long as it became the majority shareholder. They could utilize their authority to remove Willow from the CEO's position. "Willow holds the remaining 55% of the shares," Ginger answered. Cory immediately froze up on the spot. All of Southlake Corporation's shares were held by Willow alone and were never divided across various investors. His crazed acquisition of Southlake Corporation's shares was the dumbest move he could have made. "Quick! Liquidize the shares immediately!" Cory angrily shouted. He finally realized it wasn't possible to acquire Southlake Corporation. The only thing he could do now was to liquidize the shares and re-inject funds back into Morrison Group. "Mr. Morrison, Southlake Corporation had been increasing the number of shares, lowering their prices in the process. Selling them off now would be a huge loss of money." Ginger no longer knew what to do. Morrison Group had finally burnt itself from playing with fire. Cory was left dumbfounded. How is this possible? Why is this happening? He had believed that acquiring Southlake Corporation would have been a breeze. But now, his plans had gone awry, and the enemy came knocking on his door for revenge. "Mr. Morrison, I have another piece of bad news," Ginger sheepishly announced. "Just say it." Cory glanced at her. Could there still be worse news than this at this point? Southlake Corporation had bought up all of our loose shares on the market. "Oh, that's nothing to worry about. Let them be. The loose shares on the market only amount to 15% of our total shares. They won't pose a threat to us," Cory calmly explained. It was written and dictated by law that the percentage of shares determined your level of standing within the company. However, Landon, the marketing manager of Southlake Corporation, had been contacting our shareholders in private and offered to buy their shares above the market price. Ginger's voice gradually trailed off. Cory stood up from his chair. What? Morrison Group's weakness was being exploited. Even the Morrison family didn't hold at least 50% of the company's shares. Loose shares around the market amounted to 15%, and the remaining 35% were in the hands of individual shareholders. If Southlake Corporation managed to buy out all the loose shares in the market and convince the shareholders to sell theirs, they would accumulate a higher percentage than the Morrison family. Once that happened, the Morrison family would lose its power and authority in the company. "Call the shareholders in for a meeting. I'll kill anyone that doesn't show up," Cory ordered. He was intent on killing anyone that dared to disobey him, but Ginger didn't carry out her task immediately. "What are you standing around for? Get on with it," Cory shouted. "Mr. Morrison, it's too late. The shareholders have already contacted me about the situation. They even said that we should only contact Southlake Corporation from here on out, including for meetings." Ginger sounded like she was about to cry. She would have done the same as the shareholders in this situation. Anyone would have immediately sold off their shares after witnessing Cory kill their fellow shareholders without any reason. Everyone was just there for business, and would rather just sell off the shares while it was still profitable. "Bastards! They're all bastards! Who do they think they are?" Cory shouted as he punched the table. The next moment, he seemed to have lost all his strength as he crumbled onto his chair. He knew that he was done for. Now that Southlake Corporation had acquired more than 50% of the company's shares, they would be an unchallenged majority shareholder that made the rules. "Fucking hell! I should have killed all of them right then and there," Cory shouted. He had thought he could instill fear into the shareholders and have them follow his orders. But the exact opposite had happened as they collectively sold their shares to escape his wrath. "It's over! It's all over! Morrison Group is no more," Cory wailed. He seemed like a bereaved dog that had lost all its former glory. Ginger's expression was full of disdain as she realized that Cory couldn't even compare to Jin. The current CEO had absolutely zero skills when it came to running a business. Morrison Group wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state if Jin was still the CEO. Suddenly, the door to the office was pushed open. "Fuck! Who dares to enter my room without even knocking?" Cory cursed aloud, frustrated. "So this is the office of Morrison Group CEO? It's pretty nice." Caspian walked into the room with a crowd behind him. Landon, along with some legal representatives, was right behind him. "Landon, help me redecorate the interiors. I'd like to have the couch, curtains, and carpets replaced before my wife starts working here," Caspian ordered. "Of course, Mr. Lynch. I'll handle it," Landon replied with utmost respect. "Who are you people? What are you doing in my office?" Cory asked threateningly. "My name is Caspian, and I'm Willow's husband." Caspian smiled at him. "I don't care who you are. Just get out of my office. Where's security? Send them away already!" Cory shouted for security a few times, only to be met with complete silence. "It's useless. This entire tower already belongs to Southlake Corporation, and that includes the security personnel as well," Caspian explained. "Shut your goddamn mouth!" Cory became enraged. "Ha ha ha! Southlake Corporation holds 55% of the shares of Morrison Group. We're the ones that decide everything now, not the Morrison family. You should be the one leaving this office right now."
Fuck off!
"I'm the heir of the Morrison family, and I call the shots around here. Morrison Group belongs to the Morrison family alone. It's in the name," Cory screamed like a lunatic. "Have a look at these documents for yourself. Southlake Corporation is now the majority. From today onward, Morrison Group is simply just a branch of Southlake Corporation. Your position as CEO is already moot. So just get on and go," Caspian explained as he threw a stack of documents onto Cory's table. Meanwhile, Ginger was quietly hiding in the corner the moment she saw Caspian. She was terrified of him. Cory picked up the documents and immediately shredded them to pieces. "Shut the fuck up! I won't be handing over the company to the likes of you!" Caspian's expression sank. "Cory, these are legal documents. Shredding them to pieces doesn't mean it's gone. Relevant authorities will soon arrive to send you on your way," Landon explained as he stepped up. "Nice try, but I'm still the CEO at this moment. And I want all of you gone." The Morrison family had spent decades expanding their business in Dord City. They became acquainted with all sorts of big shots in the city and could utilize their connections to make the impossible possible. Chapter 475 Acquiring Morrison Group. Landon was furious after listening to Cory's words. Cory was trying to cause as much trouble as he could. "I guess we don't need to reason with people like him." "Security," Caspian declared. A group of security guards rushed into the room. Caspian then pointed at Cory. "Bring this man out of here." "Yes, sir," the security guards answered in unison as they surrounded Cory. Cory's expression distorted with anger, as the security guards who once respected him were now about to kick him out of his office. The chief of the security guard said, "Mr. Morrison, please just come with us. We're all just trying to earn a living. Don't make it any more difficult for everyone. You bastards, you're all nothing but a bunch of trash. What makes you think you can just order me around? I'll deal with you myself." Cory smiled as he prepared to strike. Dozens of thuds rang out within the room as Cory beat all of the security personnel unconscious. Then, Cory turned back to face Caspian and explained, "A good-for-nothing like won't be able to do anything against me. Caspian, leave my office now if you know what's good for yourself." He wouldn't allow Morrison Group to be snatched like this, or he would lose all respect and authority within the Morrison family. The worst-case scenario would be that he would no longer bear the Morrison name. He started to fight back like his life depended on it. "Interesting. So, you seek a fight? Show me what you got. Then." Caspian laughed and rushed toward Cory. Cory frowned the moment Caspian made a move. He was an eternal grandmaster himself, yet he couldn't figure out how strong his opponent was. He would soon learn that Caspian was stronger, way much stronger than he was. "Die!" Cory shouted as he swung his fist toward Caspian. He had no other choice but to stand his ground and fight for his position. A loud thud rang out the moment the two men collided with each other. A clean, crisp sound followed suit as Cory's entire arm was broken. The bones protruded out of his skin. Arg! It hurts! My hand! My entire arm! Cory screamed in pain as he looked at his mangled right arm. He had pulled no punches, yet he couldn't even handle more than a single punch from Caspian. I was wondering just how powerful you would be, but turns out you're even less than trash, Caspian declared with contempt. Cory's face was bright red from anger and embarrassment as he clenched his teeth. Caspian, the Morrison family won't let you get away with hurting me. Oh, really? You should be thankful I held back for so long when the Morrison family kept causing troubles for Southlake Corporation. But now I realized I needed to teach you an unforgettable lesson. What do you want, Caspian? I'm the heir to the Morrison family. Aren't you afraid the Morrisons might come looking for you to avenge me? Cory screamed with all his might. He had already begun to fear for his life. When Caspian raised his hand to throw another punch, Cory screamed like a little girl while trying to shield himself from the attack. A few minutes later, Cory was left paralyzed on the floor as all 4 of his limbs were broken by Caspian. The unbearable pain almost made him faint. Everyone in the room was utterly shocked as they watched the scene unfold. They never knew Caspian was capable of such cruelty. It also seemed that Cory would live the rest of his life in a wheelchair. They could only wonder if Caspian wasn't afraid of the Morrisons, who were the most powerful family in Dord City. Anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Morrison? Caspian asked as he wiped his hands. Cory moved his lips, but the immense pain rendered him speechless. Caspian was truly vicious enough to break all of Cory's limbs. The intense pain wasn't something any ordinary person could have handled. Caspian shook his head as he realized Cory was weaker than he had expected. Suddenly, Caspian turned around and shouted, "Miss Copley!" "Yes, Mr. Lynch?" Ginger answered. Her legs went limp as she knelt down in front of him, crying. "Please spare me, Mr. Lynch. I have nothing to do with any of this." Ginger was terrified. She remembered how she thought Caspian was nothing but some handsome man that Willow picked up to be her husband. Fear had shrouded her senses as Caspian displayed his true power. She realized she had made a mistake by making an enemy out of Caspian when she was disfigured. Now that Caspian had beaten up Cory to such a degree, it was clear that he wasn't afraid of making enemies of the most powerful family in Dord City. Ginger was just a secretary, and dealing with her would just be as easy as stepping on an ant for someone like Caspian. She realized how stupid she had been to keep on offending him back then. "Bring this bastard away from my sight. From now on, this entire tower is the Southlake Corporation's branch office," Caspian announced. Cory was furious to see that Caspian kept on insulting him, but he was powerless to fight back. "Of course, I'm on it." Ginger nodded her head and dragged Cory out of the room by his arm. "Arg! It hurts. Can't you be more gentle?" The immense pain almost caused Cory to faint. However, Ginger didn't even have the time or energy to be considerate of such matters. She just wanted to get the hell out. The 2 of them soon left the room, and Caspian sat down on the boss chair. "Get to work. Landon, I need you to fire all the employees loyal to the Morrison family. I plan to convert the entire Morrison Group into a subsidiary for Willow's company." "Yes, sir," Landon excitedly replied. He felt that working for Caspian was akin to winning the lottery. Landon would have called someone thinking about acquiring Morrison Group insane back then. The company was worth over $100 billion, after all. But such an imagination had just become a reality under Caspian's lead. The next day, major news shook Dord City to the core. Southlake Corporation had made an official announcement about acquiring Morrison Group. Morrison Group hereby became a branch of Southlake Corporation in Dord City. The intense battle between the 2 corporations finally came to an end, with Southlake Corporation being the victor. News about the acquisition had surprised many people. The very same folks who thought Southlake Corporation wouldn't stand a chance were utterly shocked by how unstoppable the company had become. Southlake Corporation had become Dord City's top conglomerate in just a few months. Everyone was curious as to what the Morrison family would do in response. They wondered if they would still maintain their presence now that they had lost their company. Loud slaps rang across the room as Tristan mercilessly dished blow after blow at Cory. Cory was unable to do anything as he sat in his wheelchair with his face swollen. "You bastard. You've really pissed me off. I chose to believe you when you swore you could handle the matters with Southlake Corporation. And now, you've even lost the entire company to them." Tristan was enraged. He would have killed Cory right then and there if Cory weren't his son. An entire conglomerate had just disappeared from their hands. Cory would now be branded as a useless and brainless man. Chapter 476: The Morrisons' Only Hope. Losing Morrison Group was unbearable for the entire Morrison family. They had turned into a laughingstock within Dord City. It was humiliating to lose their very own company to someone else. The Morrisons had wanted to further expand their rule. But now, the loss of Morrison Group turned them into easy prey as various other families within Dord City began eyeing them. Cory held onto his swollen cheeks and remained silent. His entire body was still in immense pain as he sat in his wheelchair. The most hurtful thing of all was the fact that everyone now viewed him as a joke. His actions had turned him into a clown for everyone's amusement. Cory wished for nothing but to get his revenge on Caspian. "You bastard. You're nothing but a disappointment. Don't even think about inheriting the Morrison family as the next patriarch anymore. You're not worthy." Tristan pointed at Cory, scolding him. Cory froze up on the spot. He was left dumbfounded as his father's words had sealed his fate from ever becoming the next head of the Morrisons. Cory endured immense pain as he knelt down on the ground to beg for mercy. "Give me another chance. Dad, I won't let it happen again. I didn't know Caspian could buy out all of our shares. Where the hell did he even get all his funds from? Please, Dad. I made a mistake because I wanted to make a name for myself. Please, I'm your only son." Tristan was also shocked and confused about how Southlake Corporation managed to have enough funds to buy out Morrison Group. It wasn't a meager amount like millions of dollars. Just where did Caspian manage to find hundreds of billions in order to achieve his goal? Tristan was utterly disappointed in his son after he lost the entire Morrison Group in a matter of days as the newly appointed CEO. Tristan had wished to further expand Morrison Group's power upon defeating Southlake Corporation. He never expected that Cory would try to do such a stupid move. Letting him become the next head of the Morrison family would only attract immense criticism. Tristan sighed and replied, "Just rest for now. We don't need your input for the group from now on." Cory was at his wit's end, as he knew that he would never get the chance to redeem himself. He suddenly thought about Jin and wondered if she could bring Morrison Group back. It would, at the very least, help lessen his guilt a little. "Jin, you gotta help me get the group back to our family. Just do it for the family's sake even if you don't want to help me," Cory begged. Jin remained emotionless just like when Cory succeeded her as the CEO. She saw no point in replying to Cory's request now that the group was no more. Someone like Cory would never be worthy enough to become the head of the Morrisons. Jin sarcastically replied, "I wouldn't possibly dare to meddle in the affairs of the great Mr. Morrison." Cory felt as if he was stabbed in the heart as he watched Jin ridicule him further. He had to get Morrison Group back somehow, or he would never be relevant again within the family. Cory continued to beg, "Jin, aren't you comrades with Caspian? Maybe you can ask him to give me another chance and return Morrison Group to us. I'm sure he'd listen to you." Silence. "Do you think I have any say in front of Caspian? Do you really expect him to give the group back to us with just mere words? Caspian only loves Willow, and I'm nothing to him," Jin scolded. She screamed aloud as if to vent all of her frustrations that she had been bottling up within herself. She had always stood proudly in life until she was handed complete defeat by Willow. Jin wanted to force Willow to leave Caspian's side by using Morrison Group to suppress Southlake Corporation. Who would have known that Morrison Group would also face complete defeat? She had lost fair and square even as the so-called queen of business. Jin now had nothing left to her name. Cory was taken aback by how emotional Jin was. "That's enough. How are you so shameless to even ask Jin for help after all you've brought upon us?" Tristan scolded. Get out of my sight. Also, you're grounded. I don't want you leaving the house to be ridiculed by the public." Cory clenched his teeth in disbelief as he couldn't retort Tristan's orders. He slowly wheeled himself out of the room. Tristan sighed as his high hopes for his only son was met with such a disastrous result. It would seem that the Morrisons would still require Jin's help. Tristan turned around and asked, "Jin, why don't you have a talk with Caspian?" "Dad, like I said, there's no point." Tristan interrupted her with a serious expression. "Listen, Jin Morrison Group means way too much to our family to be taken away just like this. We might no longer be able to remain within Dord City if we don't get the group back. Go and talk to Caspian, and try to convince him that he'll be in immense danger if he handles two large conglomerates by himself." Everyone would be eyeing his downfall. Jin could tell just what Tristan was trying to say. Every powerful family within Dord City had their own goals and motivations. Morrison Group didn't belong solely to the Morrisons, as the interests of many others were also involved. "I'll try." Jin nodded her head and left the room. An elderly man soon appeared from the shadows. It was none other than Anton. "Mr. Morrison, Caspian's true identity must be more than what the eye can see if you failed to assassinate him. Have you found out anything yet?" Tristan asked. "Not yet, Mr. Morrison. But why did someone as powerful like Caspian willingly marry into the stewards? His identity remains a mystery. I believe we should still remain cautious," Anton answered. Tristan's expression sank. He never expected the man known as a good-for-nothing to be such a headache for the entire Morrison family. Meanwhile, Jin had arrived at the entrance of Morrison Tower. It had now turned into a subsidiary of Southlake Corporation. Jin felt as if she was visiting a long-lost friend, even though the building still seemed familiar to her. Morrison Group had just changed owners within a matter of days. Jin took a deep breath and entered the building. Employees were surprised to see her making an appearance, as they wondered why their former employer was making a visit. They no longer treated her with utmost respect like they used to, as Jin was no longer their boss. Jin ignored all their confused gazes and stepped into the elevator to go straight to the CEO's office. Chapter 477 Emergency Meeting. Jin was stopped right as she stepped out of the elevator. "Who are you? I see that you're heading toward the CEO's office. Do you have an appointment?" Jin was stunned as the new assistant blocked her way. She smiled with a dash of disbelief. It used to be her own office just a few days ago, but she now needed an appointment to enter. It just went to show that really anything could happen in life at any given moment. The reality was that the office no longer belonged to her. Jin smiled. "Sorry to trouble you, but please tell your boss that his friend, Jin, is here for a visit." "Huh? You're Jin Morrison?" The assistant froze up for a moment before leaving to pass on the message. Meanwhile, inside the CEO's office, Caspian was comfortably seated on the chair while bored out of his mind. Suddenly, the phone in the office started ringing. "Very well. Let her come in," Caspian answered. He then hung up and looked toward Landon. "I need you to handle the company affairs until Willow arrives." "Yes, sir." Landon nodded his head without any hesitation. It also served as a test for him to handle such a huge company. Another person entered the room right as Landon had left. Jin walked in with a bright smile. "I never knew you had such good taste, Caspian. The entire office looks different from what I remember. Have a seat." She heeded his words and sat down on the couch. "So, what is it? What are you looking for me for?" Caspian asked. Jin pouted and replied, "What's wrong with friends meeting up for a chat?" Caspian was slightly annoyed. All right. You wouldn't be here for no good reason, so just tell me straight." Jin became slightly depressed as she had genuinely wanted to have a casual chat with him. She noticed his annoyed expression and decided not to delay further. Jin instantly reverted to her usual Ice Queen demeanor. "Caspian, I'm here to talk to you about Morrison Group. I hope that you can give the Morrison family another chance and return the shares to us. In return, we'll grant any of your wishes that we can reasonably fulfill." "You still don't get it, Jin. Do I look like I need more money? I can't just return the shares back to you," Caspian answered. "It's not as simple as you think it is, Caspian. The loss of Morrison Group has affected the interests of all sorts of people, and your life might be in danger because of it. I'm just looking out for you." Caspian was confused by her words. He wondered if she meant that there were even more powerful opponents backing up the Morrisons. But then again, he wondered if it had anything to do with him. Caspian replied, "Looking out for me, you say? Do you think I'm a child that needs your help? You should just go back if this is what you wanted to talk about." He would personally deal with anyone who would dare to cause trouble for him. Jin was at a loss for words as she knew that Caspian's identity was more powerful than she could imagine. "I hope you'll reconsider, Caspian." She then stood up and left the room. Right after she left, Caspian's phone started ringing. Warships from enemy countries had suddenly appeared near the territorial waters of Diatoran. Further investigation revealed that they consisted of warships from both Astronia and Videsia. The abruptness of the situation prompted the Marines to make a direct report to Balthazar. The king of Diatoran approached the matter with great importance and urgency. He assembled all of Diatoran's champions for a strategic meeting. The Dieteranian god of war himself was naturally invited as well. Caspian delegated all matters of the company to Landon, and immediately headed out to meet up with Balthazar. He also notified Sylvia May and John of the matter to begin their preparations for war. The sudden news caught all of them by surprise, but they wouldn't question or trivialize Lord Caspian's direct orders. Macy immediately appeared before Caspian, as she intended to escort him to the meeting with Balthazar. Subia was also in the car, and behind her were a handful of troops. They remained cautious ever within Dard City. No one would know when and where the enemy would begin their attack. "Why don't we follow you along?" Caspian Srivia asked. "There's no need for you to come along. I want all of you to return to Southlake City and set up defenses. If anything were to happen, Southlake City will most definitely be targeted for its proximity to the sea," Caspian ordered. "Is this going to be a large-scale battle?" Sylvie asked. "We don't know yet. Both Astroni's and Vadisi's warships are stationed only dozens of miles beyond our territorial waters, and they've already violated territorial rights. Besides, the two of those countries have long been eyeing Diatoran for war," Caspian continued. "I want all of you to ensure that Willow is safe. Tell her to return to Southlake City immediately and to stay away from Dord City in the meantime." The last time he had hurriedly left for war in South Eredlands had resulted in Lilith's tragedy. He would not let such events happen again. The enemy troops may also target his loved ones in order to restrict him. The Dieteranian god of war had to be certain that his loved ones were safe before he could go on to perform his duties. "Yes, sir, we won't let you down, Caspian," Sylvia answered. Meanwhile, in Dord City, Caspian arrived at the king's residence in no time, as he was already in Dord City. The residence was heavily guarded with troops patrolling every corner. Caspian was spared the troublesome formalities before entering the mansion, since he was the Dieteranian god of war. Meanwhile, within the king's residence, Diatoran's officers of various ranks had already gathered inside the hall. Diatoran had a total of 5 gods of war. Aside from Caspian, the other 4 were more commonly referred to as champions. They consisted of Keith Warren, the champion of East Eredlands; Benjamin Hart, the champion of North Eredlands; Dax Santos, the champion of West Eredlands; and finally, Joseph Welch, the champion of Central Plains. Caspian was responsible for South Eredlands. He was the Dieteranian god of war, and he alone ranked higher than the 4 champions. Caspian's arrival signaled the complete gathering of all 5 gods of war. The appearance of enemy warships right around Diatoran's territorial waters posed a great looming danger. Balthazar began the strategy meeting once Caspian arrived. They would thoroughly discuss every step of their strategy, as it was a major event that could affect every citizen within Diatoran in the near future. Every senior officer within the king's residence also voiced their own individual opinions. Some were in favor of a peaceful resolution, while some voiced their favor of establishing Diatoran's might for the world to see. Chapter 478 Strategic Meeting. After a round of heated discussions, everyone still couldn't come to an agreement on the matter of enemy warships being stationed around the southern territorial waters. Astronia and Vadesia were both relatively powerful countries with advanced military technology. Some of the officers wanted a peaceful resolution, as they didn't want a war to happen. But most of the officers, including the god of wars, had voiced their agreement on fighting until the very end. Suddenly, a soldier ran into the hall with a stack of documents in his hand. "Your Majesty, I have the latest intelligence to report." "You may speak," Balthazar ordered. "Astronia and Vadesia have made a public announcement that they'll be holding a joint military exercise in 2 days. The location will be right outside Diatoran's southern territorial waters. They've also mentioned the use of heavy weaponry during the drill." The expressions of fellow officers in the hall instantly sank. "I see. You may leave now." Balthazar waved his hand. The informant lowered his head as he retreated from the hall. "What's the deal with Astronia and Vadesia? What do you guys think?" Balthazar asked with a confused expression. One of the higher-ranking officers stood up and explained, "Your Majesty, Astronia and Vadesia may be claiming to be doing a joint military exercise right outside of our borders. But I believe they're just trying to show off their weaponry and assert dominance. I believe we don't have to worry about a war." Benjamin countered, "This isn't to be taken lightly, Your Majesty. Considering their distance from our shores, They can easily launch a preemptive strike from their warships and cause immense damage to our cities. We need to set up defenses. What should we do if they truly attack us? Balthazar asked. We will not attack unless we're attacked. But if they do, we'll have to show them the full force that Diatoran has to offer, Dax declared. Another officer stood up to voice his opinion. We absolutely shouldn't provoke them, Your Majesty. Starting a war with both Astronia and Vedesia would incur too many losses to be worthwhile. The greatest loser would be the citizens of Diatoran itself. Are we really going to tolerate having our enemies stepping on our heads? We Diatorans aren't cowards. If they ever cross our borders, we'll have to show them who's boss, Benjamin shouted. The other champions nodded in agreement. Balthazar had his own plans and considerations, as initiating war wouldn't involve just the 3 countries alone. Nearby countries could also potentially become enemies given the opportunity. Diatoran would be facing a huge disadvantage if a war really broke out. Balthazar turned to face Caspian, who had been silent throughout the meeting. What do you think, Caspian? I believe we can drive them away without any bloodshed, Your Majesty, Caspian answered. Oh? What's your plan? Diatoran's military has been similarly flourishing, and we can play along with Astronia and Vedesia with a military exercise of our own. It would essentially be a contest of sorts to see who's better. If we can manage to shock them with our own military strength, I believe they'll retreat on their own. Not a bad idea. Anyone have anything they want to add on? Balthazar turned to face everyone in the hall. A high-ranking officer stood up. Your Majesty, I don't think this is a good idea. It might just incite and provoke Astronia and Vedesia to start a war. And, so what if they do? We have nothing to be afraid of. With our combined might, starting the war would only spell their own demise, Caspian answered with confidence. The fellow champions nodded their heads in agreement. Diatoran could easily lose its presence as a country if it chose to remain peaceful at a time like this. I agree that we have the ability to defeat our enemies, Lord Caspian. But I can't help but be worried about the possibility that our war with Astronia and Vedesia may well trigger wars on a worldwide scale. The consequences would be unimaginable. What's the point of overthinking it and hesitating at every decision? If we listen to you, Diatoran will only be sitting and waiting for enemies to invade, Caspian snorted. He disliked the newer officers who had only recently risen through the ranks during a peaceful period and never witnessed warfare. Lord Caspian, your radical opinions to start the war may cause countless innocents to lose their lives. Society of the modern era should be developing a global economy, not warfare with one another. Caspian was furious. I'm not being radical. I'm simply voicing my opinion as a soldier of Diatoran. We train ourselves day and night and fight on the battlefields in order to protect our loved ones and to protect our country. If we were to sit idly by as our enemies invade our homeland, then what's even the point of having a military? Balthazar clapped his hands and announced, Well said, Caspian. I've made my decision. We'll play along with Astronia and Vedesia with a military exercise of our own and scare them away. I hereby assign Caspian to be the commander-in-chief of this operation. Everyone in the hall looked at each other, but no one dared to voice their arguments. Caspian stood up. Your Majesty, I have to admit that naval combat isn't exactly my forte. I believe it might not be the best decision for me to be the commander-in-chief. Balthazar nodded as he understood Caspian's worries. Caspian spent most of his career at South Eridlands. He rarely fought at sea and did not have the required experience to lead such an operation. Anyone among the champions who would like to step up? Balthazar asked. The champions looked at each other in confusion for a while. Benjamin finally stepped up. I volunteered to be the commander-in-chief, Your Majesty. Balthazar replied, You're a great choice, Benjamin. But I'm worried that Estria might invade East Eridlands during your absence. I believe you should still remain in the East Eridlands to bolster its defenses. I still believe that Lord Caspian would be the best choice as commander-in-chief. Lord Caspian has led us to countless victories. Even if he may not be experienced in naval warfare, I believe his presence alone could contribute to scaring away our enemies. We can always have Benjamin serve as the deputy commander to assist Caspian, Dax declared. Everyone in the hall nodded their heads in agreement. Everyone was afraid of the immense responsibilities that came with being the commander-in-chief. At the end of the day, Caspian would still be the best choice. Balthazar asked, What do you think, Caspian? Caspian nodded his head and announced, I'm happy that everyone believes in my abilities. Since you've all entrusted me with such a task, I won't deny my post any further. Caspian knew why everyone was trying to push him into accepting the position. The position of the commander-in-chief may well be a double-edged sword. The other champions refused to accept the mantle as the consequences of failure outweighed the glory of success. Astronia and Vidisia weren't easy prey either, and no one could guarantee victory. Balthazar praised him. Very well. You truly are the Diaturanian god of war. The king also understood that it was a title that came with immense responsibility and duty to uphold. That will be all. Caspian is hereby appointed as the commander-in-chief, and Benjamin will serve as his deputy. Both Caspian and Benjamin respectfully bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. Balthazar continued. All forces shall cooperate with Caspian in preparation for the military exercise. We'll have to show Astronia and Vidisia the might of Diatoran. We'll also begin preparations for war in the meantime. The entire hall erupted in unison. Yes, Your Majesty. That is all. You may all go now. Caspian, I still have some questions for you. Caspian nodded his head. Of course, Your Majesty. It must be an important matter if the king was asking him to stay for a private conversation. Chapter 479, Caspian's Origin. Balthazar looked at Caspian and continued. It's nothing important. I just wanted to apologize. Caspian was stunned as he couldn't possibly accept an apology from the king himself. You're too humble, Your Majesty. I don't understand. Balthazar sighed and explained. I'm sure you had some resentment when I sent you away from the battlefield back then. To be honest, I didn't feel good issuing that order either. After some years of peace, I already understand the reason for your decision back then, Your Majesty. Balthazar was surprised by Caspian's reply. Caspian continued, I was young and foolish back then. I wanted to continue my warpath as I was blinded with glory. I realized that it was a very dangerous move back then, and I'm sure plenty of people were turning into my enemies behind my back. Your Majesty's decision to send me home at such a crucial time was precisely for my safety. Thank you. Constantly seeking greater and greater honor and merits wasn't necessarily a good thing. You've grown so much. Balthazar nodded his head. Caspian was only in his early 20s when he first ascended to the title of the Diaturanian god of war, which placed him at the forefront of all 5 gods of war. His growth and development was regarded as a legend, which further emboldened the Caspian. Balthazar wanted him to cool off and develop a more mature sense of responsibility. Balthazar asked, Do you think it's a good idea to start a war now? It would be best if nothing happens, but we can't possibly tolerate having our enemies showing off right in front of us. Balthazar was very satisfied with Caspian's answer. Very well. Our enemies will pay the price of blood should they ever step foot into our lands. Your Majesty, I'll be taking my leave to begin my preparations. Time was running out as 2 days weren't enough for Caspian. Balthazar nodded and continued. Of course. I have one last question. Have you found out about your biological parents yet? He had long known about Caspian's origin. Caspian had been trying to look for his biological parents throughout the years, but he never managed to find any information. Time passed, and he eventually forgot about the matter. Caspian shook his head. Not yet. He had been trying to find out about his origin and lineage, but not a single clue was found. I've heard that you may be related to the Hunter family of Dord City. They lost a young boy that was similar to your age back then during a crisis. Balthazar's relationship with Caspian was publicly seen as that of the king with his military commander, but they were also good friends in private. He had been helping Caspian to look for his biological parents. Caspian was confused. The Hunter family? He began to recall how Lilith had told him about how she found him as a baby still in swaddling clothes. There was a broken half of an emerald bracelet hanging on his neck. Caspian began to wonder how he was possibly connected to the Hunters. Thank you, Your Majesty. I'll look into it after I've defeated our enemies. He said his goodbyes to Balthazar and returned to Southlake City to begin preparations for war. A group of men suddenly appeared before Caspian as he was about to reach the airport. The Diaturanian god of war was escorted with dozens of cars on the way to make sure that he was safe. The driver came to a quick halt as he realized that they were being blocked from proceeding onward. The escort bodyguards became alert as they wondered who the people blocking the road were. Caspian took a good look at the crowd and noticed that the leader was a plainly dressed old man. The remaining men behind him were some strong-looking men. Caspian didn't recognize any of them, however. The old man stepped up and asked, "May I ask if you're Caspian Lynch?" Caspian rolled down the car window and asked, "I am. Can I help you?" The old man took a good look at Caspian before excitedly nodding his head. "I've finally found you, Mr. Hunter." Caspian was utterly confused by the senior's babble. The old man continued, "It's me, Denzel. I used to carry you in my arms when you were still a baby. It was a tragedy when we lost you back then. The hunters have tried looking for you ever since." Caspian was left even more confused after listening to the old man's explanation. He couldn't help but wonder why the hunters came looking for him now, coincidentally right after he had just learned about their existence. He had just wanted to assign Sylvia to investigate the hunters, but they had already shown up right before him. Caspian replied, "Enough with your nonsense. I'm not your Mr. Hunter. I'm sure you're just surprised. You have a birthmark on the back of your right shoulder, don't you? And if I recall correctly, you had a broken half of an emerald bracelet with you when you disappeared. Do you still have it with you?" Caspian was shocked as the old man's claims were both correct, even though he had never told anyone about it. Unless, Caspian asked, "What's this emerald bracelet you're talking about?" "This is the other half." Denzel brought out a piece of the emerald bracelet. The bracelet looked crystal clear. It was evident it was made by a highly skilled craftsman. The most surprising thing for Caspian was the fact that it matched with the other half of the emerald bracelet in his possession to form a completed bracelet. Caspian was left dumbfounded, as he wondered if he was really about to unravel his origin and lineage just like this. He couldn't accept reality just yet. He waved his hand and shouted, "We're moving on!" Caspian was excited, but he didn't show it on his face. He needed to find out the complete truth before making a decision. And as the Diatoranian god of war, he still had duties to perform. Enemies were in front of Diatoran's doorsteps, and he couldn't spare any more of his thoughts and efforts for anything but the preparation for war. Denzel smiled as he watched the fleet of cars drive farther and farther away. He had already determined that Caspian was one of the hunters, as he resembled the current head of the family a lot. Perhaps Caspian left in such a hurry because he couldn't handle the truth just yet. Caspian gave John a call and assigned him new orders while sitting in the car. He assigned John to send out his fleet toward the southern waters to join the military exercise. Caspian and Benjamin boarded different planes as they flew toward South Eredlands. The command center for South Eredlands was within Gathram, which was also where John was stationed. Caspian and Benjamin couldn't share the same plane as they were both important individuals to the country. It was an unwritten rule where in the event of accidents, Diatoran wouldn't lose more than one god of war at the same time. They remained cautious even when they were assigned professional escorts along with a well-thought-out plan. Nobody knew if the enemy's secret agents had already infiltrated Diatoran. It could be risky as no one was certain how deep the enemies had already infiltrated. Chapter 480 Locked On. Meanwhile, at Riverside Villa in Southlake City, Willow remained in the house even though she wanted to head to Dord City to deal with matters of her branch company. The recent acquisition of Morrison Group by Southlake Corporation would keep her busy for the upcoming weeks. To her surprise, Sylvia called and told her to remain in Southlake City and that Caspian would soon explain what was happening. Willow was confused, but she believed in Caspian and returned to Southlake City. She anxiously waited, but Caspian never showed up. She decided to call him, but nobody picked up either. She then received a call from Landon telling her that Caspian had assigned him to temporarily take over the business in Dord City. Willow was puzzled as she could only wonder what had happened. She was left in the dark while Caspian couldn't even make an appearance. Willow didn't think too much about it, and just assumed that Caspian was busy with confidential work as a general officer. The next moment, Zoe arrived at her house. "Willow, are you free? Why don't you join me for a walk?" Zoe was bored after writing for the entire day, and decided to invite her best friend for an outing. Willow asked, "Huh? Where to?" Willow was under immense stress recently due to the fight with Morrison Group. She was exhausted by the time everything was over. Now that Southlake Corporation had finally entered the market in Dord City, she could finally have a moment of relaxation. "How about the club? It's time to release some stress," Zoe answered. Willow shook her head. "The club? It's not good to be there at night. Besides, It'd be awkward if anyone recognized me there. We can put on a cap and mask so that nobody recognizes us. Oh, well, I'm supposed to be the most beautiful woman in Southlake City, remember? I'm worried that others might recognize me from my presence alone even if I covered up my face. Zoe covered her mouth and laughed. Haha, when did you become so narcissistic, Willow? She continued. The club isn't such a scary place. Just come with me, girl. Willow had no choice but to accept Zoe's persuasive invitation. She knew that Zoe would just keep on pestering her if she didn't accept her invitation. Willow explained, First of all, I'll only be watching. I won't be hitting the dance floor. Alright. Let's just head over there for now. The two of them took some time to dress up before Willow gave Zoe a ride in her Rolls-Royce to the club. Sylvia, Macy, and the rest of the armored battalion soldiers who were stationed near Riverside Villa to watch over Willow were surprised when she suddenly left the house. One of the soldiers spoke up. General Frost, Mrs. Stewart has just left the house. Should we stop her? The armored battalion soldiers had changed into casual clothes and were distinguishable from average civilians. It can't be helped. Our responsibility is to protect Willow, not to interfere with her business. Sylvia answered helplessly. She also hoped that Willow would simply stay put within the house to avoid running into any accidents. Can't believe she's giving us so much trouble. Caspian just cleaned up the mess in Dord City for her, so can't she at least just stay put inside her house? Going outside right now is just giving us unnecessary work to do, Macy complained. She was still upset that Caspian had sent her back to Southlake City, though she didn't dare to complain in front of him. Sylvia replied, You're being inconsiderate, Macy. Macy sighed and continued, So, shall we follow them? Of course, all units. Follow after Willow and make sure she's safe, Sylvia ordered. Yes, madam. Everyone soon got into their SUVs and chased after Willow. They maintained a distance of 100 feet from Willow's Rolls-Royce to avoid being noticed. Meanwhile, Zoe and Willow were chatting inside the Rolls-Royce. I still think this is a bad idea, Zoe. Being recognized at the club will leave a negative impact, Willow spoke while driving. Zoe rolled her eyes. We're going to the club as normal customers. What's wrong about it? I'm the CEO of Southlake Corporation, after all. I'm sure everyone knows what I look like after that conference. It'd be bad if rumors start spreading when people recognize me in the club. Oh, come on. Even CEOs need to have some time to relax. Let's go to Rose Bar. Willow drove the two of them all the way to Rose Bar. As they walked into the bar, there was a sneaky-looking man wearing a mask outside the bar. He frantically pulled out his phone to make a call. Sylvia and the rest of the team soon arrived as well. Macy sighed and complained, What's with this place? Isn't the house a much better place to relax? Sylvia replied, That's enough. We're here to keep Willow safe, remember? The two of them went to work right away while covering for each other. Sylvia led some of her men to be stationed outside the building, while Macy went inside to monitor Willow's safety. Willow and Zoe entered the bar and booked a seat. The bar was bustling with activity as it was in the middle of the night. The powerful yet rhythmic music attracted all sorts of people onto the dance floor to shake their worries away. Willow followed through with her words as she sat down to enjoy the drinks and some snacks without going to the dance floor. Zoe didn't want to join the dance either, as she didn't want to attract unnecessary attention, given that both she and Willow had stunning figures. She was worried that there might be perverts lurking around the dance floor. Macy soon entered the bar as well. The bar was a relatively large building that could house up to 2 inquests. Coupled with lights moving and flickering constantly, Willow and Zoe never noticed Macy's arrival at all. Macy, however, was able to locate the two of them in an instant thanks to her heightened senses sharpened through years of battle. She quickly took a seat at the corner to avoid being seen by Willow. Macy was also a relatively beautiful woman, and she instantly attracted a lot of attention. She wasn't worried about the crowd's gaze as she was powerful enough to fend for herself. Suddenly, a middle-aged man in a suit walked up to her seat. Hey, Missy, mind if I join you? His lustful gaze trailed all over Macy's body as he spoke. He already had his full attention on her the moment Macy entered the bar. I do mind, Macy coldly answered. The man was stunned for a moment. Hey now, I just want to have a chat with a beautiful girl. Bars were usually frequented in groups. He assumed that Macy had come alone because she was in a bad mood and would be an easy target. The man didn't want to give up so easily as he wanted to try convincing Macy to spend the night with him after getting her drunk.